And we're live.
I just need to figure out how people are tuning in.
Oh, yeah, it's showing on YouTube. That's live.
We are already six of us. Why conversation on over. ल्याग चाहिँ निकै हुँदो रहेछ है रेकर्डिङ चाहिँ कहाँबाट सुरु गर्छ इट ओन्ली सोज एन्ड ब्रोडकास्ट या
Ramana, it says upcoming on my YouTube.
Yeah, it's already on YouTube. So just click there, upcoming ma. I think there's some lag.
Probably. No, it was showing that time. Okay.
Only I'm there. That it's showing live.
Yeah, the link works for me. I think the YouTube is live.
Yeah. What time is it? I think viewers are tuning in. So, what shall we do? We're past 2 minutes. So let's wait for a minute more and then we're ready to go. All right. Hello, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our very first online event. Still running the ropes, but it's great to have our friends here online and to start this event. This book, Gender Identity, this book, which we published, has been a part of the Eastern Himalayan series, Gender, Sexual, Other Identities in the Eastern Himalaya. And this too has been our first, in terms of many criterias, if I may say that. But thanks for joining in. Today we have three contributors, contributing scholars for the book, which was like almost 2 years in the making because of the research that went into it. Ranu Kunwar is here. Rinzing Ongmu Sherpa and Anil Pradhan Shrestha, they are here with their. So we'll be discussing at length about their chapters, and the series editor Dr. Mona Chettri is here, and she's also joined by co-editor Nikita Rai. So I'll hand it over to you guys. Good luck.
Thank you, Raman sir. And thanks to everyone who's joined in, and thanks also to these wonderful contributors and to Nikki for joining us today. As Raman just mentioned, that this is the first of, well, I suppose, I don't know, technically this is the first of our online series of kind of like meet your authors, and it's an opportunity to know your local research and your local researchers. So it gives me great pleasure to be doing this along with my co-editor Nikita today. And here we have three fantastic contributors. And I don't know, like, if you read, I hope you guys have read our volume, but they've written really great chapters, very exciting, very refreshing chapters in our book. So I'm not going to take much of a time, but just to like give a sense of what we're going to try and do is like have like a really free flowing conversation for approximately around 40 minutes, and hopefully we'll have more people joining in. And for the rest of the 20 minutes, the remaining 20 minutes, it'd be great to have some sort of like an audience interaction. So yeah, so Nikki, feel free to chime in whenever. And it's, again, as I said, it's a conversation about the book and about the authors and about the state of research in our Eastern Himalayas. So I just want to like start off by asking our authors just to give us like a brief introduction about themselves and the chapter that they have written for the volume. So let's just start with Ranu, and let's go with Ranu, Rinzing, and Anil, if that's all right.
Thank you, Mona. Thank you, Raman, Nikita, Rinzing, and everybody who's come here today. So, when I was writing the chapter, I was based in Delhi, and the lockdown happened. I came here back to Siliguri. That's when it struck me. I saw the call for the chapter, and there wasn't much scope of doing a field work back then, right? And I was a literature student, already trying to steer my wheels towards anthropology, sociology. It gave me a good idea. I mean, the limitation made me think of where I was, made me introspect things that I had experienced from my childhood, as I write in the chapter as well. Well, we'll get more into that later, I hope. And right now, I am based in Canberra. I'm doing my PhD from the Australian National University, and as it happens, this chapter really helped me think about the PhD project, and Siliguri happens to be my field site for the project that I'm doing. We'll come back to it. We'll speak more about it. I think I'll let the others speak now. Thank you.
Thanks, Ranu. Rinzing, do you want to give a brief introduction about yourself?
Sorry, yeah, just to introduce about what I've read. So I'm Rinzing, and hello everyone. I am basically from Peling, and I'm doing my research on Darjeeling, which is my field area. And as per this book, the notifications that came in, which was very interesting because I got the forward for the notification from many people, and it also coincided with one of the articles that during the lockdown, you tend to introspect a lot about your surroundings, about yourself. So similarly that happened, and I'd written a small piece, a very personal one, on the fate that comes with being born a Cheli Beti in Sikkim. I mean, like in a Nepali society, so to say. So that was something I just wrote because experiencing patriarchy in a very subtle manner around you, and how it goes on to shape your identity through socialization and those things. So when I saw the notification, it immediately prompted me towards writing for this chapter, which sadly was also a challenge because I'm not from a literature background, so I had to do a lot of learning as well on the social linguistic aspect of it, critical discourse analysis, which was the methodology, and also the writing about it. So that was a bit of a challenge, but it was also an escape, so to say, from my own research, which has a lot to do about identity, ethnic politics, and all that. So yeah, so that was what I've written. So I think basically, like Ranu did, I think we have to discuss chapters a bit later.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's fine. Whatever. Yeah, we can do that later. Yeah,
Yeah.
but we will get into it in a
Yeah.
bit.
So this is just what motivated me towards putting down the chapter.
Thank you, Anil.
Yeah, hi everyone, and thank you for having me here. I'm Anil, and I was born brought up in Salwa. It's like in South Bengal. It's a Nepali-dominated cantonment area. So stayed there, and then came here for higher education in Calcutta, and I'm based here now, pursuing a doctoral research at Jadavpur University, and my field is primarily Indian queer diaspora in the global north. But for the chapter which I contributed, it actually, I mean, it was conceived like when I was doing my masters. So when Parajuli's book came out, then it was like the first text I read from the hills, which had a queer characters, and I was like very intrigued by it. So I'd written a small conference paper, and then I presented it, and then it just went to the back burner. And then the CFP came out and was like, this is a very good opportunity to rework that. And by that time, Salim Rai had published his novel, and that gave me a good base to bring out this inaugural discussion. I actually wanted to work on a more ethnographic focused paper at the time, but then I couldn't because I was a bit far off, and then the pandemic was not allowing it. So I just stuck to what I know, that is literature, and then gave you that paper, which basically deals with the two texts, Land Where I Flee and But It's Himalaya. Um, the first one is the first text that has come from the Darjeeling Sikkim Himalaya dealings and has characters who are visibly queer, like protagonists, um, in the English language, obviously, and then Salim Rai's text, probably based in Kalimpong region, and so each of them talks about the experiences of queer characters. One hijra and the other a diasporic gay man. And the for the second text, it is mostly a gay youth from the Darjeeling Hills, and the experiences of otherization, not being at home, trying to find a way out in the society. So that's what I discussed in the chapter in more details, and we'll talk about it as we move forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Anil. And Nikki, do you want to like just give a brief intro about yourself and I don't know, whatever you feel?
So yeah, I'm from Darjeeling. I was born and brought up there. I I've always had this thing like, oh, you know, I need to get out Panehalko, and also because I always felt that there's always more to be seen outside. So that has always been my pursuit. I was in Sikkim and I worked on the same novel that Anil has worked on in his paper. Um, it was, I mean, when I finished it in 2018, it was no, I mean when I was doing my research in 2016, I didn't know shit, if I can use that word here. Research methodology and everything, and even the circumstances. I would say now they're a bit more they're more, are they more welcoming? Maybe we can discuss that later. The research environment. Um, but yeah, so that's what I did, and now I'm based in Kathmandu in a completely different field. But hopefully, I can get back to research later and then work on more projects like the Eastern Himalayan series. Yeah.
Great, thanks, everyone. So just taking the conversation forward, it's interesting that you started off like everyone spoke about, their starting points. So, what has been your like? Can you tell us just briefly about your journeys as a student and as a researcher? Like what have been the highs and what have been the lows, and most importantly, what are the challenges? Because I suppose what we're also trying to do through this series, the Eastern Himalaya series, is also identify those challenges and how can we collectively come through those challenges, right? So just it'd be really interesting to like get your perspective on your own journeys on or as a researcher and as a student. And we can just start with like maybe start with Anil and then Ranu and then Rinzing, if that's all right. Mix it up a little bit.
Thank you for the question, Mona. Now research-based thing, because I have studied in relatively liberal spaces, educational university, higher education spaces in the heart of the city, from Presidency and then Jadavpur. The journey has been quite good, in the sense that the exposure was good. I have had exposure to the need and the fire to always be inquisitive, to work further and then ask more questions, and that is how I got into research in the first place. Now, specifically queer research and queer cultures and literatures, because Jadavpur had this queer studies paper, and then I shifted to Jadavpur because of that, and thereafter I stayed back for an MPhil and then a PhD. So that was how it was consistently being filled. So obviously taking part in conferences and thereafter publications. Um, Sometimes people have commented that like Anil, like wherever I go, I see you in the conference, and you're always there with the one queer paper. And I was like, I was always labeled as that one queer paper person. And what used to happen was that often the that session used to be put into the very end of the conference, so that otherization of like the the location of that research. I was very intrigued by that all the time, because it was happened as a parallel session in a very decrepit classroom, like where very few would come. So there would be inclusion, but then there would be like, you stay there, we are happy with you. Oftentimes there have been the chair who has been like old retired professors from different state universities and saying like there's too much of queer nowadays, and like I have to say like yeah, you will hear more of that as you go on. So the experience has been liberating in the sense where say when there's a coterie, when there's a very niche uh, colleague base or say the cohort. But when you go outside of the city, say in the districts or in the state universities, maybe it is catching up now. But back then, say when I was doing my masters, it was still a new thing. Nowadays, I mean, like queer has become sort of like it sells sort of thing. But then, one way it is good that people are conversing more about it. There are more conversations about it. So nowadays, I see one queer session everywhere in all conferences. One queer section in book in edited volumes. So that is how inclusion has started. And then moving forward, I hope that more of it happens in India. Like I'm talking specifically about Indian context.
Okay, sorry. I know I said like we'll go in a specific thing, but what you just said really triggered my question that I had around your chapter, and maybe Nikki can also add into that because I mean, queer studies is not my field, so I don't know much about it. But from what I have, my understanding and what you've just said, it feels like it's a very marginalized topic, right, of research, and I think in the Eastern Himalayas, it's even more marginalized, right? So I wonder, like, I just wanted to ask you, while you've been doing a lot of research on it, and you've written on it, do you find that there are like same topics, the gisapita recurring themes that you see in the books, the stories, the novels that are coming out, um, and and if that's the case, I don't know, right? I'm just throwing it out there. And if that's the case, like what which direction does it need to go, the queer studies in Eastern Himalayas? And it's just based on something that you just said just earlier about you wanted to do an ethnographic focused research for this book. How would you have done that, and would that have been very easy or difficult? Because I imagine it would have been slightly difficult, but I don't know. So yeah, if any your thoughts and comments.
Thank you for that. So to answer the first question, it is a well-known fact that I mean, it's obviously that there is dearth, right? That queer texts from the hills, specifically from Darjeeling and Sikkim, are very few. So, say when I was working for another project with my co-author Pema, narrated this. We were trying to find texts which were written in the Nepali language, and even then, say if we found texts written in, say, we found one of them written in the 80s. Then again, say recently in this decade, in the earlier years, the texts have queer characters or themes, but they are always in the passing, like touch and go. And even then, it is not in the sense that they would portray it as a very progressive state of literary representation. Um, Recently, the new generation of writers were queer, who identify as queer, or maybe queer allies. Their writings are becoming more promising, obviously, but the publication side of it is mostly online, or say, like which are not very conventional. That is good in a way because it becomes more accessible. But then also, if you see how does that get disseminated in the region, because obviously there's a very small uh, uh, field of readership base, right? A very small population reads that. So I was very interested in looking at that, and hopefully that gets published next year as a paper. Uh, Now, the ethnographic base thing, I did want to go there and work in terms of intimacy because at the time I was focusing on intimacy in public spaces, how like queer uh, uh, subjects they become as the author says, like like when there is this liminality, how do they negotiate spaces, public spaces, semi-public spaces, in order to like carry forward with same-sex intimacy, and thereafter to look out for relationships, like whatever relationships are there with the society, with the heteronormativity they're prevalent. Now that was a problem first because in some ways I am sort of an outsider in the hills, though my dad's home is there, but then I have never lived in the hills in the sense. I have been a visitor, like a sojourner. So maybe that also gives me an objective perspective of that. So I would be interested in doing that. But then, like I was saying, access is one thing. So whenever, say, I I have been trying to work on a project too, again a separate project, where I'm looking for quailitary texts from the region to put together in an anthology, again with Pema. Uh, to say to be honest, like there are very few writers, right? And to reach them is quite a challenge. And even when you reach them, uh, the conditions such that they would might not want to contribute, right? They might want to write about it, firstly, but they might not want to contribute, and secondly, they might not know or have the means to express themselves in a way which can be published. So those are the two things that I have been seeing in the past year. The challenges are there if I want to get into proper queer studies or queer sexuality studies in the hills.
Thanks, Anil. Does anybody have anything they might want to add, like in the terms of their own experience in this field? Please feel free if anyone wants to add.
Well, I have something,
Um,
Nishi, to add. I used to be a literature student myself, and before I switched into anthropology, I did find really hard to come across some literature, right, that I could work upon. And the intention on my mind was really to move away from that epicenter that was created around Nepal, Darjeeling, and to really talk about experiences perhaps in Assam where I grew up, even in Siliguri, and not to only look at stories that are based here, but are there actually, for example, books that are being published here, right, by perhaps something like a Rachna book, perhaps in Siliguri, that's really taking the literature scene forward, and it was well, the situation was quite sad, and also the reason why I moved towards ethnography, right, because then it gave me access to so much of oral narrative that was not being written down. And I think completely agree with what Anil is saying. I felt that that lack when I was being a student of literature completely. I think, and Anil has taken that decision to go forward and keep working with literature, and also combine other methodologies in between. I could not do that, honestly. That was one of the reasons.
yeah. Oh, can I? Rinsing, or shall I just I'll just quip in quickly about the support thing. Definitely, when I was doing my research back in 2016, there was a huge dearth of research. But apart from that, there was also a lack of support because I studied in Sikkim, so there was a lack of support in academia itself. I remember, um, and it was quite disheartening then as a student because I mean you're trying to basically feel the ground around you. Um, but then you're not given wings to take off. But so I clearly remember I can't even remember what that session is called, but then the one where an external examiner is called in to read your proposal and then they give comments on it. So I think at that point we were feeling the strains of orange nationalism then very strongly, or I think we just started feeling it 2016, 17. And then one of the comments clearly was you cannot place, because I remember I'd taken references from same-sex love in no, was it same-sex love in India with Ruth Vanita, and then it was given one of the comments was you cannot place sacred deities and queer in the same line. So I mean, I was a bit, I don't know what to do with that comment, honestly. But yeah, maybe things have changed now. And yeah, but we do need to keep pushing for more work. Like, so we need to have at least one paper, even if it's one paper in a conference, so that at least people take notice, like Anil does. And so what, man? If people say he's the one person with one queer article, that's necessary, I think. So yeah.
Yeah, just to add on to like everyone, and also pertaining to my own experiences, like even though like Anil pointed out, like liberal institutes or campuses and spaces provide you that independence to carry out. So, but that only happens, I don't know, it's his personal experience. People might have different experiences. Like for my work, like even belonging to like a few among the liberal institutional spaces, but I had to like working on the Sherpa community, which is the community I belong to. and my own supervisors or RACs, and having to remind them constantly, even though they know like Sherpa is a different entity and the Gurkhas. So, like the mixing up, oh, you're working on the Gurkhas. So, constantly reminding them, no, Sherpa is a different ethnic group altogether, and we have, like our own identity formation processes and all that. So, that also talks volumes about, like how the main, so to say, mainstream academia in India, looks and specifically focuses on the research that is happening in our regions. And that was one. And the second thing, during my MPhil, that was in 2018, I submitted. So my guide was constantly telling me to go and look for materials in IGNCA and National Archives of India, which I did. When, like accessing the archive itself, I think she was putting us through that training, but there was no such literature. I mean, like there was no such archival material available. Firstly, they were on Sikkim, like the pre-monarchical documents relating to it, but there were no such documents directly related to the Sherpas or anything to do. So, like, just trying to create that conversation with her and trying to explain it to him or her about, like, about our research. So it was a bit of a struggle. And secondly, I'm like doing an ethnographic researcher as a sociologist for my PhD. I would also like to point out the aspect of emotional fractures and being a woman, how you access the field, which itself, positioning you yourself as a researcher in the field had been a challenge. In spite of me belonging to the Sherpa community, I was like, firstly, going as a amateur to the field. You would assume that, okay, you have the, like, your moderators, your people there, so you're already an insider. Sort of that naivety came into me, but which was so very difficult, going in there, having to position myself as a woman, as someone who's constantly being questioned, are you married or not, how old are you, and like positioning myself, sometimes they are like confusing me to be a journalist, and the suspicion that surrounds you as a researcher. So those were the challenges which, we don't really speak of much. So that was another challenge that I faced. And the other thing I would like to point out is, during the lockdown, sadly, even in spite of belonging to few of the universities that proclaim to be number one or number two, whatever, the liberal spaces, so to say, like he pointed out, nobody told us, nobody guided us towards, how should a researcher go about in the field during a lockdown, when people expect, like your works in some sort of excellence, but at the same time we're not given the modus operandi, or we're not given any guidance on no vision, nothing at all to go about as a reason. So those were the challenges which we faced. And the access to literature, like few people have mentioned, like there are the literature which are produced in the mainstream, so to say, the Western literature that are produced to us. So those are very expensive, so the access to literature, so those are the problems that we've been constantly facing, we have been addressing to a certain extent, but we really don't know what to do with it. So these are the, I think, challenges that we face, and these are the problems that we face as an ethnographer. So I think, yeah, that was what I faced as a researcher in my research.
Thanks. Ranu, do you want to add something about like your maybe challenges that you faced as a researcher, as a student here? Also,
Well, yes.
because you were teaching, weren't you? So
Yeah,
maybe
I
your
was.
challenges as teaching students,
Well, yes, and well, it's been difficult, right? Entering into Eastern Himalaya as a researcher who's trained in DU, JNU has been very difficult, and I see that from both ends. Not fitting in quite in North India, not fitting it quite in here, because I was born in Assam, not always very close to the Nepali community, and hence I also spoke the language differently, and those became markers of exclusions everywhere, right? And I'm very sure many of you would relate to that, of not belonging either to Darjeeling, to Siliguri, and always being an outsider. And hence, when I moved to Australia, it wasn't much of a difference, right? It was a continuity to what was I was already living here. And my experience as a PhD student very recently in Australia made me think that when I'm making a presentation about Siliguri, I have to set up this elaborate context where Siliguri is, why it is important, why it matters. And I was wondering that, okay, I'm doing that for an audience who do not know perhaps where Siliguri is. But if I was doing that in India, let's say in perhaps in DU, in JNU, I would be setting up the same kind of context. That makes me wonder, right? And how much of it, that geographical proximity and that idea of this entire nation, how much it really matters that we are always trying to always trying to bring that as a research agenda wherever we go to. And hence, again and again, like Anil was saying, right, you become the queer scholar, you become the brown scholar, you become the Nepali scholar. It's always inscribed on your body. And in a conference, for example, somebody's talking about theory, and the moment you bring about your own experiences, right, as an ethnographer, their theory is theory, your theory is case study, and that is the most hurtful thing, which I've found even in Australian universities, more in case of this case studies coming up from the global south, where for example, if you want to make a critique of, just given an example of perhaps a reading that was being done in the class, and my knowledge of the Indian context was appreciated much, right, but it was only a very specific context. For example, it does not make into the larger debate, and that has always been the problem, not only in India but also outside. And I keep wondering, how I mean, how much are we going to keep navigating through this? And Mona, I mean, honestly, your work has been so important in this aspect. Your PhD work from from SOAS, right? You're looking at Darjeeling, Sikkim, and Siliguri, and trust me, that's one of the first work I read cover to cover that has really helped me explore ethnographically different aspect identity politics. It's bringing together so many different gist of identity politics on the Gokhan movement in India. And I think this book does exactly the same, right? It's the book that I would have want to picked up, not even as an undergraduate, perhaps even as a PhD student, that I hope somebody else will pick up, right? I was very excited to go through it, each and every chapter, and read the kind of literature that's being produced from here. So plenty challenges, but it is a hopeful future, right? I mean, we're coming together. We are really thinking about. I mean, I remember, I think, writing to just to one of you, because there was a specific focus on that wanting local scholars, right, from within the region. I remember maybe writing to one of you. I mean, where do I place myself? I migrated from Assam, and then blah blah blah. Do I qualify to write as a local scholar? And these things keep on coming, and I do feel accepted, right? Even perhaps in a very small gathering as such. And I'm immensely grateful to have this space, and to be able to say that my literature, my research belongs somewhere.
Great. Thanks so much for, and like you guys have very succinctly pointed out all the problems. I think a lot of researchers from the region we face, right? This othering that we face as individuals, as academic, as researchers, and the problem of studying small places, the problem of geography, the problem of studying small communities, and then having to set up this whole background and the context, right? All these challenges that we face. But as you Ranu just said, like we're striving together. So this brings me to my next, I suppose, topic of discussion is around, like, what are the spaces, because I think we're also kind of looking for how we can build on what we've just started. So what do you guys think are, like, the new spaces of collaboration? How can we, because the challenges are so many, right? From lack of literature to access of literature to lack of support in academia, and again, like this whole, these problems related to gender, to ethnicity, to language, all these things. So we've got all these problems. What are the new spaces of collaboration? How can we overcome these challenges? Thoughts? Anybody? Anyone? Anyone?
I think I'll go first. I mean, whatever comes to my mind. I think we really need to speak with each other. Speaking with Nirvan the other day, and he just dropped me an email. I knew that we had done like this book together, and I found out he was in JNU and I was in JNU for the longest time, and mostly because, and it came as very striking to me because I grew up without having Nepali friends around me, for example, and that's a difference that I feel very very intensely perhaps in my life. And then I realized that Nirvan has been studying in JNU for a long time, and then through him I met the others, and because that is, I think that becomes the the fecund ground through which you can begin to converse with each other. And Nirvan and I got together, started talking about, and from Siliguri, I'm from Siliguri. We really started just pitching ideas to each other, thinking that perhaps we can collaborate something in the future, but that's more at an individual level. But I do feel that because as an undergraduate student, when I went to Delhi, would always I mean, perhaps I would not want my identity, right, to be as visible. Perhaps there weren't any avenues or languages available to me to very dominantly assert who I am, where I'm from, and what it means, right? The cultural meanings and baggage that I carry with me. So it's always brushed under the carpet, and that conversation never comes up. And hence, you move from one friend circle to the other, and and that's something I keep telling. It's the most intensely I keep feeling, right? um, and perhaps after the collaboration with the book, I have met other scholars from the region, and that keeps me motivated. And please chime in. That's something that came into my mind. Sure.
Yeah, like I wanted to add, thank you for that, Ranu, because I do think that this interaction between among the scholars and like the cohort is quite lacking when it comes to like research in this field. Um, the field in the sense like Darjeeling and Sikkim, like anything related to that. I mean, though I might know people who are working on certain things, but I would not be aware of what's going on in the field. Though I don't work in that field, I mean, like my field is different. But say because I've interest in this, and in the past year I've been looking into it. I also want to say that like apart from these scholars, coming together, I think we need to interact more with the local spaces where the non-scholarly work is going on. Non-scholarly, by that I mean I mean that specifically people who are not in the academia, right? Because we become so prepossessed with ourselves and our jargons that we cannot really connect to what's really happening on the ground. So what I really feel that like say even when I was collecting a data or a material actually for that anthology is on in the making, I felt that there's this a disconnect between so what trying to say and what would be understood there, right? It would be seen as something like they are being considered as subjects, right, where they will be studied. So instead of that, maybe we have to converse, maybe like more of an interaction, conversation. So find out local artists, like what the NGOs are doing, like what is really happening. I mean, there is no work yet in that field at all, unfortunately. I forgot to add that Nikita, these dissertation was a great help, obviously, because that was the only text which was there when I was trying to find anything, and accessible also, right? Because it was accessible online. So maybe like to access both the field and the research, we have to really get the conversation flowing with the what's going on in the field. I mean, I don't know much about anthropology. I'm talking in the sense like in a very cultural studies perspective.
Yeah, yeah, just to add on, and also, like you all mentioned, yes, the academia and its jargons, because of which I think the people whom we are writing for, the Sherpas whom I'm writing for, will never be able to read it, or will never be able to, that's why the suspicion also arises in the first place as to what are you all doing, what are you all going back and writing about us. So Anil mentioned a very pertinent point, and just to mention, like we are taught like Foucault, Derrida, all these scholars, and if all this in ethnic identity, you have to read about Barthes and Anderson. So these are there; these are our foundational texts on what we are doing. But at the same time, the tendency, I don't know about the Western scholars, but in India, like the entire idea of backing whatever your findings are from the field with these texts is not at all, it is not feasible, at least for many. I mean, like, it's not possible as well. But again, the idea of your work being inferior and not as much academic as it should be comes up. So I think it is more important to back these your argument, your findings, your data substantially, and not don't make your ideas small with the theory, rather make your ideas bigger and substantiate with few theories. I think that we will become very it will become very useful body of work. And the other thing, yes, interaction, as such, interaction is there, but only to a certain level is it possible, because even when you are on conferences, few of us might be an introvert or an extrovert, and by what you learn in the process when you are in a research, you cannot confine yourself to your comfort space, you go out and talk. But I've also realized, when you try to build networks through conferences, seminars, or any such platform, this platform happens to be a very close knit personal, and it's very welcoming as well. well, so that's why you get that space. But it's not like that when you go for an international conference abroad, or when you go for any such conferences. It's only limited to talking, discussing about your work. You send an email, sometimes you do not even get a response back. So these are the realities that comes into play, and as a result you just start confining yourself and going back to, what's the use of discussing. So I think there should be at least a space where you can, uh, a chosen amount of people, because not everybody has the capacity of building social networks. So bringing, like in Sikkim, there is a body that's just been registered, Doctoral Association of Sikkim. So it's to a certain extent, taking up the question of methodology in the Himalayas, and which is completely different from the mainstream methodology, which, it's a bit of a mess when you start writing down, backing all the strong theories with your finding, which is not possible. So I think these kind of topics should be addressed in these spaces, and which these networks that we should start building, not just the networks you have with you, but also, in a broader level. So I think that is very essential when you talk about, you know being accessible and opening up and making research at least more friendlier and at least more comfortable, so to say, because sometimes it really cannot be. Thank you.
Thanks, Nikki. Do you want to add anything?
Um,
Or if you had any
yeah.
questions to ask these guys?
No, no. I'm just talking regarding the space thing. I don't know the name of the space, but I think some professors from North Bengal University, like Hill professors from North Bengal University, I think they'd started some sort of research association. I remember this guy. I don't know if you know him, Vinayak Sundas. I think they had something related to it. Like they were trying to establish a network of local researchers. अब access को लागि के गरेको त्यो चाहिँ मलाई थाहा छैन. I wish everything was open source, but sadly it's not. Yeah, त्यो चाहिँ छ. But yeah, so research को एकपट्टि भयो, तर अर्कोपट्टि चाहिँ one of my, I think, biggest issues with academia is like, you read like a fancy theory or something and then it opens your mind. You're like, wow, this is amazing. Okay, हुन्छ होइन त. Um, but they, like Rinzing also pointed out, like मैले जे पढिरहेको छु, what am I reading? How is it affecting this lady who has to walk like, 10 miles to fetch water, or like every day has to go to the forest for firewood. Well, I think also the effect by the so that has always been my problem with Indian academia, and all these conferences are open. It's nice, yeah. You share a lot of interesting ideas, but does it go beyond that? Because at the end of the day, yeah, everybody comes up with a resolution, or we can do this, or we're buzzing with ideas and all that. But then, how does it go beyond that? That is, I think, one thing we should also look forward to. We should also look for, like, Erata, yes, definitely a space, common share gani space. We need to establish something like that. But how do we take our research? How do we make it more practical? Bani, I think needs to be addressed. So yeah, they.
Yeah, thanks. And I think what Nikki, what you just pointed out is the eternal question, right? What is the point of research? I ask myself that a lot. Like, how is this helping anybody? Um, but we still do what we do, right? And I think, I hope it does help in its own way. But and Rinzing, thanks for letting me know about this doctoral association. I did not know of this association. And I hope they're doing good things. So it just brings me back to probably my last question for you guys, is about the sort of research space generally in the hills. I mean, we all have read stuff that's coming out from the region, and what do you think? Is it an issue of, like, what are the big problems with research in the region? Is it an issue of quality? Is it an issue of quantity? What is happening? And what do you think is, what do we think we need to do to make it better? Right. So this also links to this whole idea of, like, how can we collaborate and do things, but also, like, what are your thoughts on the present research scenario in the Eastern Himalayas? And I don't know, I can't decide if it's an issue of quality or if it's an issue of, like, good research. I don't know what, right? So what are your thoughts on the research scenario in the Eastern Himalayas at the moment? Again, anyone.
Yeah. Uh, problems per se, as in being a scholar from here, based in an institute somewhere else. So the thing I experienced when I came back home, thinking that I would have access to secondary sources pertaining my topic, which is based in Darjeeling, but it was not, I mean, like, it was a bit of a challenge, getting access to the literatures, which there were not many substantial literatures to be found here. And secondly, what I feel is that uh, the basic aspect is people here are not really, I'm not saying like for the whole, but then people here are not really aware of what is, like Mona said, what is a research about. And when you come back home and writing your thesis from home, the major challenge is, so what happens with it? So when do you get a job after that? Is there any guarantee of a job after it? So these are the fears that surrounds any academician or any person or any scholar that is there. So I think we need to pave in that path where, I mean, there are very excellent scholars coming up, working in own regions, working in own community, working in their own identities. So these are things that are new, I would say, and it wasn't there before. So these are things that have come up. So there are really a lot of potential pertaining to research in the Himalaya hills and per se in our region. But the thing is, we need to pave that path, so that, it's our duty as scholars, that we need to pave a path where many new scholars come up, taking away the fear of, oh, what, we grow old with it, there is no job. I mean, those are the realities. There is no job. Not everyone gets entitled to a scholarship, not everyone. And PhD itself is a very challenging task to get admission into. These days people are literally, struggling, and they consider people who are already registered as a scholar, they are very privileged. And the other notion is, masters पछि काम पाएन भने चाहिँ PhD गर्छ भन्ने त्यो खालको, there's a notion as well. So I think we need to build a lot of awareness in simple words about PhD, what is a PhD and what you get, because it really molds your personality. It really, changes the person you were into a different person. So these are the I mean, like, the personal things. But the basic thing I would say is the significance of a PhD. Why are you producing a PhD work, and how is it helping your community? Like, which is a very difficult task to, like Mona said, to point out, like, what is my research helping in. So I think these are the questions that need to be addressed, and it needs to be put right there, so that we create a much safer and a much understandable understandable path towards research for the future generations in our society. So that there are more people coming up in PhD. I mean, come on, yeah, there should be a lot of more people producing PhD. And it really doesn't, I mean, like, quality, and when you talk about quality or the quantity of it, it really doesn't matter until and unless you know the relevance of it, you have a good path with, because you cannot just say यो quality छैन, यस्तो quality उनीहरूको छैन. Given the, the culture, social, economic capital that a person comes with, you cannot really question that as well. So our duty as scholars is basically to pave that path for the future coming people who really want to get into research.
Thanks, Rinzing. Anyone? Your take on the research environment scenario?
Well, just a quick comment. When I think about research on, in, and from, coming out from the Eastern Himalaya, I do try to keep one thing in mind, is that just changing the geography of your, let's say, your field site is just not sufficient, and you need to constantly really look into the geographies of the theories, perhaps, right? The geographies of the questions itself that you are projecting onto a space like Siliguri, a space like Darjeeling, right? Where are those questions coming from? And that's something that I keep thinking throughout my project, right? It does not really help to just speak of Siliguri, but at the same time, perhaps borrow a language that is borrowed from the global north, for example, right? I'm working in the field of urban anthropology, and I keep thinking that, then what are the different geographies that we can place Siliguri within? And Eastern Himalaya comes up as that cultural, political, literary, and linguistic landscape that could really change the game for how we start thinking about these places. What kind of questions then come up across it, right? That's my 2 cents on it.
Thanks. Anil, do you want to chime in, or you?
No, I think Rinzing and Ranu have completely, like summed up everything they sort of like it's very beautifully put. Yeah, I mean, I do agree with both Rinzing and Ranu. And to add to Ranu's points, I think that location of research, that's what she was trying to talk about. say location of research and not to see the Darjeeling and Sikkim hills as like blocked off like self sustaining space where you would go in, work on it, and then again come out and show that this is what I've done on this field. But say to relate it to the regional politics, say relating it to the northeast, whether we can do that or not, or taking it to the West Bengal or to say the northern India, because we all know that Darjeeling and the Sikkim Himalayas are in a very unique location geographically too. So right, so that sort of I think we need to keep in mind. Uh, Apart from that, I think everything has been talked about.
Thank you, guys. I don't know if we have any questions because I wanted to open it also to the audience, but I'm not sure if we have any questions.
Well, questions haven't come in yet, but of course, this video is going to continue stay on our YouTube channel. So I think eventually we can keep getting back time to time and engage in this conversation, I guess.
Okay, I mean, that's fine because I think we've still got like 5 to 10 minutes to chat. Gonna turn
Well,
that
I
off.
have a question for the editors. I mean, I actually have the exact same question that you asked, the last one, because you were the one receiving all the abstracts, the chapter. So I think you have a very good idea. I mean, to gauge at what kind of research is being produced there, and just want to hear your honest take on it.
All right. Shall I go first, Nikki? All right. I
Sure,
will.
like
My honest opinion is I was absolutely like blown away. I was so. I was so. I don't want to use the word impressed, but I was just filled with so much excitement and hope. And I was like, oh my God, look at these amazing scholars. We have people, amazing scholars here. Where have these guys been hiding? Or how come we have not made enough noise about these amazing people doing amazing research? Right. So I think I was just like really, really, really impressed. But having said that, I also do recognize that there is a sort of a disjunct between a category of scholars and authors such as you guys and maybe a lot of students who are also in other universities who may not be as uh, I don't know very like as good. Sorry to put it very bluntly, right? So the idea is like, how do we bring that up to a level that that is equal, and I think that's a really big challenge. But I think this is a problem that really begins at the school level, right? It begins at your foundational levels. But having said that, I think like just going through this project has actually filled me with so much hope, not just in terms of like the researchers and their capacity, but also in terms of what is being studied and what is being researched. So it's really great, and it's filled us with so much energy to do it, and to actually continue with this. So hopefully we'll be announcing the next the next series topic soon. But yeah, this it's been a great experience, learning experience for me also. Like I've learned a lot from doing this project. Yeah.
Yeah, like when Mona first approached me about the editing, I was like, finally, something of this sort is being done in the hills, or I mean, in the region. And well, I second Mona's sentiments. I was super excited when we got all the abstracts because one after the other, every there were also unique topics, and there were also ones that needed to be touched on really urgently. I don't know if urgently is the word here, but really, they really needed to be touched on, and then so it was, as a first time editor, it was a really good learning experience for me too, methodology wise and everything. And also the disparity that Mona's talking about. This is something I felt because myself as well, because I studied in, well, the hills where I had a so-so research experience, and then the level of research that came in was insightful for me as a researcher and as an editor, and also later on, maybe let's say if I get back into academics, it'd be I can carry this forward to other researchers or other students as well. So yeah, but it was insightful. really insightful. And I don't know, maybe the next book. Let's see.
Yeah, and then just to wrap up our conversation, because Raman is a timekeeper and he's very. We have a question. Oh, we have a question. All right, great.
This is Yukta Acharya, and she's asking, where is it? It was wonderful to hear all the valuable inputs. I'm also interested in Himalayan studies and would further want to pursue research from the area. What would be your advice for us?
Anyone? Gyan, Matnos.
Don't procrastinate, just go for it. um, yeah, for East, uh, I think you need to be prepared for all the challenges that our researchers have mentioned here, because obviously when you go to the field, you will have your own specific challenges, but then, yeah, you add that to the ones that the researchers have brought in. So just be mentally prepared that uh, things will not be brought to you, presented to you on a platter. You'll have to go and do your own digging. Um, and but well, you will I mean, if you see some of our authors there, you will find some support. Hopefully you can approach them. Maybe you can approach Mona or us, any of us, if you're interested, and then we'll see.
Yeah, just to make one small point to a question, you mentioned like research in the eastern, like your Himalayas, eastern Himalayas or Himalayas. So there you'll be concentrating on one particular area. So I just want to make sure that you concentrate on something that is, say, 70% personal to you as well, because that will ensure your interest for this particular topic, which will be a very long journey, say for instance 5 years, 6 years. So to sustain that, because you will come up with a very ambitious research proposal, your all your zeal and all is there, but after a certain amount of time any zeal dries out, especially when you have big breaks, or I mean like certain like distractions that come up. So to sustain your journey, no matter how tedious, just make sure it's all worth it. And for that, I really believe, that's my personal opinion, take up something that really is personal to you, as well as that it's going to be a feasible field and not just an ambitious one. So that is what I think is very essential.
Thank you. Here's another question. Should I read that out? I think my mic was off. I would like to know from the authors any one experience of difference, shock, or defiance you felt while writing your essays.
Yeah, and I just want to add like that to question to add for Ranu, around, did you feel a sense of tension? Because your chapter talks about these women in the beauty parlor, right? And the constant negotiation as a side of beauty and what beauty is and all that that's changing, and also as a side of it's a constant contestation. So did you sense from your respondents a sense of tension between looking like like how beauty parlor is supposed to be a space where you come to feel beautiful, look beautiful, but also it is a space where you're constantly negotiating with patriarchy? Do you feel a sense of tension there? And I think this is kind of like links to what they've just asked you. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll come back to you what you just said, Mona, but a very distinct episode comes to my mind when I was doing my fieldwork here. And there's a focus group of a couple of beauticians I was interviewing. And we were talking about the experience, especially the early experience. Let's say most of them, I mean, I was interacting with people who had moved in from perhaps Assam or other parts of the Northeast to Siliguri and then set up their shops. And obviously, my site was Milan Mall, right? It is in the peri-urban areas in Siliguri. So most discussions were about how in the early 2000s they would work in the and near the Siliguri market, the Hillcut Road. This is where they would work in the parlors, and then gradually, they had the capital to build up their own setup, and they had earned a name for themselves while working through this makeshift beauty parlors. And we were talking about their experiences in the city as a Nepali woman, especially at the juncture of perhaps the Gorkhaland movement, right, which makes you very visible as a Nepali person, and sometimes you're even afraid. And these are accounts from my interlocutors where we're even afraid to speak in that language because you are instantly identified as a Nepali, and the market being a Bengali dominated or a Marwari dominated business hub. And we were talking about one very distinct experience. I mentioned it in passing of how usually beauty parlor practices, the reason why it is only for ladies is because it's often associated with solicitation, right? For example, quote unquote prostitution, and that was the topic of discussion in the focus group. And what came up suddenly was a very distinct instant where one of them is telling me of how they were waiting for the bus to come back home, and somebody just made a very sly remark to them and asked them, oh, Milan More women are very famous, right? Because obviously there were very baggish connotations there, and I had to stop the recording there because other women did not agree. They said, oh, you should not write about these things in the book, and I knew about it, right? Because it has been in my family for a very long time. My mother, my aunties have been in this business for a long time. I knew the connotations that were carried inside, but I did not expect it to implode in such a manner. And I had to pause the conversation, and we really had to discuss why it is important. I mean, I listened to them first, and then I told my point of view of why it is important for me to write about this thing, right? Because the reason I was doing the chapter is to break down the stereotype, but it imploded into something else completely. Gender obviously was a part of it, ethnicity, language, everything else, right? The identity politics came into it, and the moment of shock was where a part of the interlocutors, they wanted to go ahead with the interview, they wanted to get this registered of how they're perhaps treated not just as a beautician out in the city, but also at this particular juncture in the city where you were also a Nepali person. That was perhaps is something that completely changed the direction of the paper, and hence the second half of the paper happens, right, where I speak about the sociability of the beauty parlor. I remember, right, in LSR as an undergraduate, we're speaking about this liminal feminist spaces, and usually in a North Indian setting, you would speak about the front yard, the angan, ghar ka angan, and where everybody comes together in the evening. It's a women's space, right? And I would think, but the women in my house are not in the house, they're in the parlor, right? So where are they building these social spaces? And that's when it came to me, because when I kept on coming back to the parlor, I became a part of these conversations. I learned about the Gorkhaland movement because at that time I was with my family, I was in Assam. I came back here and learned a lot from my aunt, for example. That was a moment of shock, definitely defiance on my part, to go ahead and write with the understanding that okay, with me putting it forward, it has to be a collaborative effort, right? Or I can only put forward what they want me to. And that consensus was reached through a discussion which happened off the record, but that completely changed of how I thought about these beauty parlor spaces. And like you spoke, Mona, about this very this heteropatriarchal presence where you always see a beauty parlor or any beauty practices and regime as repressive, disciplinarian, and I really started to think about, but I don't think of my mothers, my aunties like that, right? And that really, that personal element that Rinzing was also talking about really drove me to think about these spaces very differently. And I came across some feminist geographers who had already paved that path to talk about that specific nature, perhaps that comes out of a specific location, and that made me really think about and reflect about the neighborhood quality of the neighborhood nature of the beauty parlor itself, or what sets it apart. Thank you.
Thanks, Ranu. I really enjoyed reading about it, and also it made me think about gender in a different way, because we kind of in the Eastern Himalayas, we kind of, I don't know, do we take pride? I suppose we take a little bit of pride in saying like, oh, but we are different. Our patriarchy is different. We are not as repressed, right? Relatively speaking, not as repressed as our friends in North India or South India, right? So for me, it was a really interesting thing also to read and see the beauty parlor as a different space. And we have a question from Roshanda.
Roshan Rai asks, hearing hope repeated a number of times, what are your hopes? How would you want to place this and hopes in terms of the politics that is Eastern Himalaya?
And again, like, I just want to link this, about your hopes and hopes. I suppose I'm guessing, like, as thinking about like Roshan Das question about hopes, probably as an individual, as a person in the Eastern Himalayas, also as a researcher. And I just wanted to, like, peg my question. My final question to you was like, what's next for you guys? Right, like, what's next for you as researchers? But yeah, this is a two-part question. One is like asking, like, linked to what Roshan is asking about hope, and what are your hopes, right? And as an individual, as a researcher, as an academic, and then my question is like, what's next to in your lives and careers? Anyone? No hopes? Everyone's hopeless. What's going on?
Well,
Anil, do you want to?
yeah. So, I mean, I do hope that there are more conversations on specifically on the LGBTQ plus issues, that concern the region, because whatever conversations are there, they are very restricted to specific politics. So, say even if there are say pride marches, which have been taking place say once or twice, there is a requirement of further like cohesion within the community itself and with the other with the heteronormative society, which is not happening at this time. I mean, obviously, it's easier said than done. I mean, it's difficult for people say who are located in spaces in the hills where say talking about say LGBTQ, the terminology itself does not exist, right, for certain spaces. So how do they like negotiate with that? Because I've only seen them on video, but say when I go and talk with people in the rural areas, which has not taken place for a lot of time. So there are different sets of problems and issues which we really cannot like sit here and really like think that maybe this is how it has to be done. Uh, so I hope that those things come to the fore and there's more of conversation, uh, not just in say literature but say more in terms of how the society looks at the LGBTQ community.
Yeah, putting it in words of Anil. So I also do hope that there is. Can you all? Yeah, I do hope that there is a shift in the. I don't know. Sorry to say, a very egoist setup of academia, and I hope it becomes a much friendlier a space for people, so that the inferiority complex which is imbibed, I think, in almost every scholar, like, how is my idea even relevant, or how am I making any contribution, or the other person, like, what will they view, what will their views be? Like Mona said, nothing is right or nothing is wrong in social sciences, so your opinions and your, how you put it, how you put your ideas matter. So I hope we are able to give across our narratives, our voices from the margins, and our stories, and more about, like Anil is doing his work, exceptional work. I also saw his book. He's also making an edited volume himself with Pema. So I think there are more of us telling our stories rather than learning. I mean, like, I was reading a book by few scholars on the Sherpas, and sorry to say, done a large amount of work on the Sherpas, but being, I wouldn't say insider, being a being working on the scholars themselves, I mean, like, working on the Sherpas themselves and reading about these Western scholars writing, I mean, like, all of us can point out the loopholes and point out the like they write in a very good manner. So but you can point out the loopholes, point out the lacunas that are there in their research. So I do hope that our ideas are not, we do not subjugate our own ideas, rather you just speak up and not be intimidated by a lot of jargons and theories ourselves, because it's more important, I think, in academia to put forth the narratives, the voices from the margins, and just put it out there. So rather than just introspecting as to what people, what like, our ideas are not as nicely put, as in Balinese cockfight, the one we read on guest. So like, you don't have to compare constantly with other people. You just have that close group of people and build that space. So I think it's really our duty to build in that safe space where you can put in your ideas without having the fear of being criticized. So I think these are the few things I do hope for, more so for the research in our region, and more so for people who may not have access to as much of secondary sources or as much of culture capital as we are exposed to, being in JNU or DU or Jadavpur or Jamia. So I think that is very important, and I do hope that we see these kind of trajectories and transitions taking place.
Ranu, are you hopeful or hopeless?
I very selfishly hope that something that I began with in the when I was introducing myself is that I really hope that since we're speaking about this academic setting about research, I really hope that in a 15 minutes presentation I don't spend 10 minutes just setting up the context. That's the first thing, and the second is the moment Eastern Himalaya becomes the center of our discussion. It's also that we should not forget, right? For example, social justice, which should be at the core of our research. We should not become the same centers that we are hoping to displace. um, that's what I hope for.
Nikki, do you want to talk of your hope or are you okay?
Well, I'm hopeful about all the hopes we've expressed today. Uh, yeah, so we actually got another comment here. Research from Ashish Chettri says research must be supplemented with activism and praxis. You might be a great researcher in gender studies, but if you're unwilling to, sorry, that's been blocked out. Ramanda, can you read out the rest part? It's been blocked out on my end. Oh, make a stand for your maid or your passerby at work. Okay. Um, well, I hope to create this, well, I don't want to call this space. Well, I hope to create a space for more representation in the hills. I mean, back in 2020, a friend and I, we were trying for something similar in March. Where we got in, a couple of journalists. We grouped in various members of the public, and we had a sort of panel discussion for students. It wasn't like a very formal seminar of sorts. I hope something of that sort. I don't know. I hope to, well, continue something of that sort, maybe next year or the year after, with a bigger team. So that's what I hope to create. And yes, we discussed issues on gender and sexuality there, and also maybe something in elementary education, because we do guess at the higher level it is important to highlight all these issues, but if we start from the base up, then definitely something can be done. So yeah, I'm hopeful to create all these things in the future.
Thanks, everyone. We've also got another comment from Stuti. Do we?
Stuti Pradhan says, I think as researchers, ethnographers, it is important to report back on our findings and analysis to the respondents/participants.
I think these are like interesting comments, and just what Stuti is saying, and what Ashish, I think, just a comment before about linking research with praxis and giving back to our community, giving back to the people that we work with. I think that's at the core of what we are trying to do. But I think as researchers along the way, it becomes difficult. We tend to, it becomes difficult. Like, every time you go to the field, you do get asked, like, why should I talk to you? What am I going to get out of it? And I think we should, and we'll say things like, oh, I'll write a book and whatever, right? We say things like, but I think we as researchers, as Ranu was saying, talk like, the social justice needs to be at the core of what we do. So I think even as we are designing our projects, right? I think we need to find innovative ways in which we can give back to our communities, not just of respondents, right, but to our communities of academics in the region, because we talked a lot about building collaborations and networks within amongst us, right? So how do we do that? So I think, I mean, this is, I think, a good, what we are trying to do here also with the Eastern Himalayan series is also, it's a starting point for these sorts of things, and to think in very, new and innovative ways of how we can actually take our work back to the field. Yeah, not make research less extractive, because research is fundamentally extractive. We all know that, right? So anyway, so Ramanji, are we closing it, or are we?
We have one more comment.
Okay, that's Sunil.
Sunil Pradhan says the idea of the field in Eastern Himalaya furthers the inadequacy of modern social theory. Yeah, it's a
It's a comment, I'm guessing. I guess we agree. Yes, with Sunil. Yeah, and I think this is what, like, Rinzing also talked about in length, about how what we learn and what we take as foundational texts and theories may not always fit, right? So we need to be guided by our own uh, case studies instead of the other way around. So, and also not to be daunted by the fact that we're studying small spaces, small, the fact that, yes, it is a challenge, right? Like, if we're giving a presentation that we have to spend 5 minutes setting up the scene, but that shouldn't take us away from the fact that what is happening here in the region is very important, and our job as researchers is to be able to link that small place with big ideas. That's the link we need to be able to make. But yeah, I agree with what Sunil is saying.
So yeah, one of the things which I felt as a bookseller and why we stepped into publishing was exactly for the kind of things we were discussing today, to have this kind of platform, which the bookshop of course has been, but also because a lot of these scholars also coming in doing their researches, and sometimes these like somebody was pointing out, these papers get published abroad in journals that are either inaccessible or inaffordable to the people here. So that's where, after 20 years of book selling, I felt I need to step in and try and see if at least these books are accessible to the whole group of I mean, with so many universities and young scholars, like, they need to have access to these books. And back in 2016, when Eastern Himalaya series was just ideated by Mona, that's when we immediately, like, kind of got together, and this is the first thing that we've done together, the book, and with your research paper. And I tell you, like, there's no rush to kind of keep seeing these books fly out the shelves. It will eventually reach the right places, it'll reach in the right hands. And my hope is that it will encourage so many more scholars to walk down the path of research. And that's the biggest hope. That's where the changes begin to happen, I guess. It's been a wonderful session. Thank you so much. Thank you for all the people who viewers who attended our show. We still have some scholars, contributing scholars from the book, who have not been we ourselves have not met yet. It will happen online. It will happen sometime in December. We will be announcing the dates and the program soon. We will also be announcing, like Dr. Mona Chettri said, we'll be announcing our next topic for the Eastern Himalayan series soon. Until then, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. We'll see you soon.
Thank you, guys. Thanks to all everyone who has joined in, and thank you, the contributors. Thank you for your wonderful chapters. I really enjoyed, and it was such a pleasure and such a great opportunity to work with you guys. It was really great. All the best for everything that you're doing, and thanks to the audience who've chimed in. And yeah, if you guys ever need anything, we're always here. And good luck with everything, and hope to see you all in person at some point. Bye
Thank you
bye.
so much.
you.
Thank you.